Welcome to this compilation of bizarre and bewildering sci-fi short stories. I'll be narrating The Rag and Bone Men by Algis Budrys, Don't Look Now by Henry Kuttner, The Autumn After Next by Margaret St. Clair, and A Matter of Protocol by Jack Sharkey. For more of my narrations, I'd like to point you towards my Substack. There I publish 3 free stories a week, plus a bonus hour-long story each week for paid subscribers, or sometimes serialized novels. You'll get them all sent to you by email every Saturday, and you can turn off the other Substack notifications if you don't like them. So head over there, link in description, for ad-free narrations, knowing that you'll be going the extra mile to help me out as a creator. Oh, and if you're interested, check out the modern novels I've narrated. The most recent is Lords of Conquest Iron Raven by Nick Mayhew. It's Romans in space. For that and other narrations, find the Amazon links in the description. But for now, let's get to the stories, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. The Rag and Bone Men by Algis Budrys. Narrated by William Skye. Unfortunate castaway, marooned far from home, with nothing to share his loneliness but humans. The other one, Charpentier he called himself, he and I were going back up the hill to the foundation, carrying our bags, when I happened to remark I didn't think the Veld was sane anymore. I call myself Maurer. Charpentier said nothing for a moment. We kept walking up the gravel path between the unimaginatively clipped hedges. But he was frowning a little, and after a while he said in an absent way, "Now, how would one determine that?" He looked straight into my eyes, which is something that has always upset me, and challenged, "I don't think one could." I felt the shock of inadequacy. Words came out of me. Perfectly accurate words, I know, but I never know how, and sometimes, when asked, I forget. Now, I must be very lucid. I must be his kind of man, I thought, and picked my way among my words. "These things he's had us get," I said, putting the burlap bag down and stopping so as to hold Charpentier in one place. "He wants to build something unearthly," Charpentier said, annoyed because I was playing his kind of trick on him, and so baldly. "What standards do you propose to judge by?" But I was right and he was wrong. Now it remained to make him see how. Yes, he wants to build something unearthly, out of earthly parts. He wants to take 6 radio tubes for an earthly radio, 3 pieces of earthly lucite exactly a quarter earthly inch thick, a roll of earthly 16-gauge wire, a General Electric heat lamp, and all these other things, the polystyrene foam blocks, the polyurethane plastic sheeting, the polyvinyl insulating tape. What have you in your bag, Charpentier? Out of all this, he wants to make a Veldish thing. He spent years learning about earthly things, Charpentier pointed out. For years we've brought him books, men, everything he needs. Now he's learned what the earthly equivalents of Veldish materials are, and he's ready to make his new transporter. Charpentier had a dark face, dark hair, dark beard, dark eyes. When his dark brows drew together, it was easy to see that his best expression was dark scorn. "I think he's desperate," I said. "I think he's learned all he can. He's learned what the nearest earthly equivalents to Veldish things are, and he's learned that all Earth can give him nothing closer. I don't see how he could do better. Even he. You cannot make apples of cabbages. But he wants to get home. You know he wants so much to leave here and get home, and now he's desperate and is going to try making a new transporter out of materials nothing like those in the one that broke and marooned him here." "And it won't function?" Charpentier asked. "There is that risk. But why shouldn't he try? What's insane in that?" "I fear it might work. I fear it might work in ways a transporter should not." And I shivered, for if I say something, I feel it, and I do not feel anything I don't believe is right. I have been wrong, but not often, or perhaps I forget. Charpentier smiled. How should a Veld transporter work? That's not the point, I cried at Charpentier's obstinacy in being Charpentier. I don't have to know. The Veld has to know and be sane enough to try something different. Look, I said, searching, being my own kind of man now, and letting the words come straight from the images in my head. Assume a man. Assume a man stranded on an island for years. Assume he has ways of realizing his heart's desire if only he can find the things to work with. But it's a small island, and while it's a good island, how can it give a marooned man not only comfort but heart's desire? He searches. He perhaps sends messengers if he himself cannot penetrate the jungle, such messengers as he can command. And in the end, after years, he knows he cannot have exactly what he wants, but he can have something very near it. So in the end, he takes a rag and a bone and a hank of hair, and makes a woman, Charpentier laughed. If he fails, what of it? But if he succeeds, Charpentier, if he succeeds, couldn't he see? What sort of woman? Charpentier looked at me for a moment, but I hadn't made him see. He saw only me, and I had taken up his time without delivering value. So he chastised me. The Veld made me and you. Are you dissatisfied? He had that trick, Charpentier. If you tried to give him a problem he couldn't solve, he gave you a greater problem of your own to add to the one you already carried. I picked up my bag and followed him up the hill to the foundation, where the Veld timelessly waited. It was dusk, and as I walked I turned my eyes up to the stars. One eye was larger than the other and a different colour. My nose sat askew on my lumpen face. Though Charpentier was a hunchback and lacked a finger, still he was a handsome hunchback. But I, whom the Veld had made second with Charpentier's example, was merely whole. And from my eyes, tears. We entered the foundation. It had been erected around the Veld when he first came, and there were men who could question. Now the building was neat and kept up, but all its many rooms were empty, and all its many machines were still. Charpentier had his cottage on the west, a very learned man had used it while working with the Veld, and I had mine on the east, where a military commander had kept his family. The Veld lived in the heart of the foundation, in the odd-shaped room whose walls traced the configuration he had been forced to assume when his broken transporter had interrupted his journey between where and the home he pined for. Men came from the town below the hill to care for the building, but Charpentier or I had to go fetch them. They no longer questioned. They distressed us with their constant need for commanding, and so every time they were finished with their work, we commanded them homeward. No earthly creature lived on the hill. The Veld was kindly, but an end comes to kindness. The time came when the questioning of men would have led them, if answered, irrevocably into Veldish ways. It was perhaps a kindness, too, that the Veld did what he did to questioning creatures. But, however it may have been, now there were only men to be commanded. Charpentier commanded in the west, and I in the east, and the Veld, though he permitted us to question all men, and each other, commanded us. Charpentier and I did not often speak to each other while in the foundation. We were too near the Veld and insufficiently full of ourselves. But as we rode down the elevator, with its noise of metal sliding all alone in the world, Charpentier looked at me, and I knew what he looked. I have thought to myself that Charpentier says of everything, "Why is this thing not perfect?" while I say to myself, "Where is the perfection in this thing?" Surely my thought is as potent as his. But you see his advantage over me, for he was forever safe from what I might look at him, but I was not safe. We reached the chamber of the Veld. We opened the door and displayed our accumulation to his perceptions. "My being reflects you," the Veld told us from his perception, and seeing that he was become beautiful, I knew we had done well. "Now will I make and take my way, and you in your sorrow stay to see the world restored." This was as he had promised the world and us before he put an end to questioning, though only we remembered. But I wondered, I did not question, I wondered, as I imagined his making of the new transporter, taking my imagined thing from what I knew of how he had made us, I wondered whether the world was safe. I thought of the chamber beside this one where we had been born. I had often been there, only to look. There is the tank, the Rochester, Minnesota Biophysical Equipment Co. tank. And there is the Velikaya Socialisticheskaya Rossia coagulator, and the IBM 704, and the Brown Boveri heater. There stand the cabinets with their Torsen-held arts metal refrigeration units. And the cabinets stand full of flasks and ampules, and there is the autoclave full of Becton Dickinson Yale syringes, and dangling from the wall are the Waldos the Veld used to manipulate all these things. And of all these earthly things, the Veld made men not entirely earthly, for the Veld is a Veld. Now soon the new transporter would take the Veld away, in ways I wondered were perilous, and it would be Charpentier and I who stayed to see the world restored. Charpentier and I, who called ourselves, but had no names. He commanded us to go, and we went, I east, Charpentier west. I saw Charpentier hurry down his side of the hill, handsome and hasty under the stars. I walked, for me to run is to risk, and I trembled, for me to feel is to know, and the Veld was desperate. He slept at night, secure from questions even though he slept, for his power, once exercised, was irrevocable so long as he existed. But tonight he did not sleep. He made. I thought of my assumed man on his assumed island, red-eyed and tremulous of hand, bent over his pot, stirring, unable to wait for morning. I thought of the light from his fire shining on the dumb eyes of his faithful messengers waiting at the edge of his clearing. The messengers are dismissed from service, yet not quite sure they are dismissed. And I thought of this earth and the Veld's old promise to us that tomorrow it would wake knuckling its eyes and need a loving voice to say there was an end to nightmares. I would speak and Charpentier would speak, but what would we say? And in what voices born of the Veld's touch on the Waldos? And would there be more than speaking to do? I did not think there was much I could do but speak. Charpentier lacks a finger, but I have hands, but I lack them. Oh, but the stars were cold. The moon in this season was a day moon, and now below the horizon. Stars and galaxies, but beyond them, where the Veldish beings lived, nothing I could see, and below the stars too, here where I reached the brow of the hill and clumsily opened my wings, here too nothing, as I lurched into the night and in great strain beat toward the places of men. I had a favourite place, the place I had chosen to begin to speak from. It was small, as men measure things, a few lights in the darkness, here the sheen of a lake, there the tiered woolliness of trees, a town in which I had disposed those men who must first unbind themselves from the years of no questioning. For unlike the Veld and his transporter, and even the Veld needed a transporter, Charpentier and I could not be everywhere. It was my thought to reassure these men first, and have them go out and reassure others, as older brothers will soothe the younger in the night. I knew from an old argument that Charpentier planned the same. But of course they would not be the same sort of men for Charpentier as for me. Still, they were all men. Once they had all rubbed the sleep from their eyes, they would tell each other what they saw, and in the end, and all men would have agreed on the shape of the world, so it would not matter what imperfections Charpentier pointed out, or what implicit glories I perceived. If the Veld's hand did not tremble as he stirred his pot. And yet it had. Charpentier had said more than he thought when he thought to stop up my mouth with myself. I faced away from the foundation, now mile on mile behind me. But my eyes turned inward, and in me my mind hovered over the Veld. I had no actual distant eye, no way of seeing beyond the curve of the world or through the haze of the air, no ear to listen to a sound so far away it cannot urge the molecules of air my pinions grope at. But often it is well enough to think, for any thought seems accurate enough to act on, and in time thoughts grow so practised that they might well be eyes. And so I saw the Veld, though I did not see him, and I saw him falter. In me the Veld suddenly told, "I have made, and I go. Forgive me for your sorrow." And I forgave him as I had forgiven him long ago. For his duty was to men, not to ourselves who were part of that duty. And Charpentier, I knew, had nothing to forgive, for he was glad of his sorrow. The wind numbed my eyes. I wept. Under the cold stars my crude cheeks glistened. I hovered over the town where some men slept and some men worked, because some machines run during the day and some run at night, and I listened for anything else the Veld might have to tell, for he was my irrevocable commander as long as he existed on this earth. I also listened with the ear of habituated thought. And I heard. In my mind's eye I saw the Veld use the earthly transporter, but it was not with my mind's ear alone that I heard what I heard. The pot erupts. The stranded man claws back in agony so great he cannot even scream, arms, legs, and face smouldering, and jounces on the ground, to lie, to moan, to be a long, mindless time dying. And at the clearing's edge the little messengers have no one to say what could be done to soothe him. What now? Where to go? What to do? How to repair? O Veld, Veld, long-living Veld, what truly eternal sorrow! I sank down through the air, bereft and graceless. What could I do for the Veld? All that remained to me was what I could say to men, but I knew as I landed among them that the Veld's promise could not be kept, since the Veld was still here. I cried out to the men, "Awake! Arise!" They stumbled out of their houses, but when I said to the first of them, "Question me," he obediently answered, "How?" I go back to where the foundation was now and then. I bring doctors with me after each time it seems to me I have found a way to tell them what to seek. The Veld lies where his chamber was before the stone decayed, and tells me nothing. If he truly reflects me, as he is now, then I don't know if I can bear to wait for the day when I can dash myself down from the outraged air and surrender myself to the sea-speckled rocks. The doctors say that if only someone would tell them what questions to ask about the Veld, and if only someone would give them the answers to the questions, they might be able to do something. Charpentier is there sometimes and mocks me. "You're getting crazier every day, Maurer," he says. "Suppose you restore the Veld, then what? Does he make another transporter?" He shakes his head. "Poor Maurer. What are you doing to these people you bring here? What do you want from them? Something the Veld himself couldn't accomplish?" I try. I try to tell them how to question, and I command them to question. And I hope the Veld dies. But though Charpentier and I, even Charpentier and I, are growing a little older, the Veld is only moribund, and no more dead than he was before the days when 30 generations of men battled to keep the southernmost edge of the creeping ice from burying the Veld beyond the reach of hope. For I hope, though I can see a sprig of silver here and there in Charpentier's darkness now. The Veld must be accessible to my hope, though I must command millions of men. And I think Charpentier hopes too, because so long as he can see me failing, he knows I am imperfect, but he wishes perfection for me. I know he brings no doctors only because he has not yet found a way for a man to respond to the command, "Be perfect." Each time the hope dies, I tell my men, "Go home now, rest." And they go home. But I blunder about, thinking that perhaps if I could kill the Veld, that would mean an end to it. But nothing can kill the Veld unless it be something the Veld knows of. So first we must heal the Veld. And healed he will once again seek his heart's desire hopelessly. As do I. As do I. Don't Look Now by Henry Kuttner. Narrated by William Skye. That man beside you may be a Martian. They own our world, but only a few wise and far-seeing men like Lyman know it. The man in the brown suit was looking at himself in the mirror behind the bar. The reflection seemed to interest him even more deeply than the drink between his hands. He was paying only perfunctory attention to Lyman's attempts at conversation. This had been going on for perhaps 15 minutes before he finally lifted his glass and took a deep swallow. "Don't look now," Lyman said. The brown man slid his eyes sidewise toward Lyman, tilted his glass higher, and took another swig. Ice cubes slipped down toward his mouth. He put the glass back on the red-brown wood and signaled for a refill. Finally, he took a deep breath and looked at Lyman. "Don't look at what?" he asked. "There was one sitting right beside you," Lyman said, blinking rather glazed eyes. "He just went out. You mean you couldn't see him?" The brown man finished paying for his fresh drink before he answered. "See who?" he asked, with a fine mixture of boredom, distaste, and reluctant interest. "Who went out?" "What have I been telling you for the last 10 minutes? Weren't you listening?" "Certainly I was listening. That is, certainly. You were talking about bathtubs, radios, Orson—" "Not Orson. H.G. Herbert George. With Orson it was just a gag. H.G. knew or suspected. I wonder if it was simply intuition with him. He couldn't have had any proof, but he did stop writing science fiction rather suddenly, didn't he? I'll bet he knew once, though." "Knew what? All this won't do us a bit of good if you don't listen." "It may not anyway. The trick is to jump the gun, with proof, convincing evidence. Nobody's ever been allowed to produce the evidence before. You are a reporter, aren't you?" Holding his glass, the man in the brown suit nodded reluctantly. "Then you ought to be taking it all down on a piece of folded paper. I want everybody to know, the whole world. It's important, terribly important. It explains everything. My life won't be safe unless I can pass along the information and make people believe it." "Why won't your life be safe?" "Because of the Martians, you fool. They own the world." The brown man sighed. "Then they own my newspaper too," he objected. "So I can't print anything they don't like." "I never thought of that," Lyman said, considering the bottom of his glass where 2 ice cubes had fused into a cold, immutable union. "They're not omnipotent, though. I'm sure they're vulnerable, or why have they always kept under cover? They're afraid of being found out. If the world had convincing evidence— Look, people always believe what they read in the newspapers. Couldn't you— "Ha!" said the brown man with deep significance. Lyman drummed sadly on the bar and murmured, "There must be some way. Perhaps if I had another drink." The brown-suited man tasted his Collins, which seemed to stimulate him. "Just what is all this about Martians?" he asked Lyman. "Suppose you start at the beginning and tell me again, or can't you remember?" "Of course I can remember. I've got practically total recall. It's something new, very new. I never could do it before. I can even remember my last conversation with the Martians." Lyman favoured the brown man with a glance of triumph. "When was that?" "This morning." "I can even remember conversations I had last week," the brown man said mildly. "So what?" "You don't understand. They make us forget, you see. They tell us what to do and we forget about the conversation. It's post-hypnotic suggestion, I expect, but we follow their orders just the same. There's the compulsion, though we think we're making our own decisions. Oh, they own the world all right, but nobody knows it except me." "And how did you find out?" "Well, I got my brain scrambled in a way. I've been fooling around with supersonic detergents trying to work out something marketable, you know. The gadget went wrong from some standpoints. High-frequency waves, it was. They went through and through me. Should have been inaudible, but I could hear them, or rather, well, actually I could see them. That's what I mean about my brain being scrambled. And after that I could see and hear the Martians. They've geared themselves so they work efficiently on ordinary brains, and mine isn't ordinary anymore. They can't hypnotize me either. They can command me, but I needn't obey now. I hope they don't suspect. Maybe they do. Yes, I guess they do. How can you tell? The way they look at me. How do they look at you? Asked the brown man as he began to reach for a pencil and then changed his mind. He took a drink instead. Well, what are they like? I'm not sure. I can see them all right, but only when they're dressed up. Okay, the brown man said patiently. How do they look dressed up? Just like anybody, almost. They dress up in human skins. Oh, not real ones, imitations. Like the Katzenjammer kids zipped into crocodile suits. Undressed? I don't know. I've never seen one. Maybe they're invisible even to me then, or maybe they're just camouflaged. Ants or owls or rats or bats or anything, the brown man said hastily. Thanks, or anything, of course. But when they're dressed up like humans, like that one who was sitting next to you a while ago when I told you not to look. That one was invisible, I gather. Most of the time they are to everybody, but once in a while, for some reason, they... Wait, the brown man objected. Make sense, will ye? They dress up in human skins and then sit around invisible? Only now and then. The human skins are perfectly good imitations. Nobody can tell the difference. It's that third eye that gives them away. When they keep it closed, you'd never guess it was there. When they want to open it, they go invisible like that, fast. When I see somebody with a third eye right in the middle of his forehead, I know he's a Martian and invisible, and I pretend not to notice him. Uh-huh, the brown man said. Then for all you know, I'm one of your visible Martians. Oh, I hope not, Lyman regarded him anxiously. Drunk as I am, I don't think so. I've been trailing you all day, making sure. It's a risk I have to take, of course. They'll go to any length at all, to make a man give himself away. I realize that. I can't really trust anybody. But I had to find someone to talk to, and He paused. There was a brief silence. I could be wrong, Lyman said presently. When the third eye's closed, I can't tell if it's there. Would you mind opening your third eye for me? He fixed a dim gaze on the brown man's forehead. Sorry, the reporter said. Some other time. Besides, I don't know you. So you want me to splash this across the front page, I gather? Why didn't you go to see the managing editor? My stories have to get past the desk and rewrite. I want to give my secret to the world, Lyman said stubbornly. The question is, how far will I get? You'd expect they'd have killed me the minute I opened my mouth to you, except that I didn't say anything while they were here. I don't believe they take us very seriously, you know. This must have been going on since the dawn of history, and by now they've had time to get careless. They let Fort go pretty far before they cracked down on him, but you notice they were careful never to let Fort get hold of genuine proof that would convince people. The brown man said something under his breath about a human interest story in a box. He asked, What do the Martians do beside hang around bars all dressed up? I'm still working on that, Lyman said. It isn't easy to understand. They run the world, of course, but why? He wrinkled his brow and stared appealingly at the brown man. Why? If they do run it, they've got a lot to explain. That's what I mean. From our viewpoint, there's no sense to it. We do things illogically, but only because they tell us to. Everything we do, almost, is pure illogic. Poe's Imp of the Perverse. You could give it another name beginning with M. Martian, I mean. It's all very well for psychologists to explain why a murderer wants to confess, but it's still an illogical reaction, unless a Martian commands him to. You can't be hypnotized into doing anything that violates your moral sense, the brown man said triumphantly. Lyman frowned. Not by another human, but you can by a Martian. I expect they got the upper hand when we didn't have more than ape brains, and they've kept it ever since. They evolved as we did and kept a step ahead. Like the sparrow on the eagle's back who hitchhiked till the eagle reached his ceiling and then took off and broke the altitude record. They conquered the world, but nobody ever knew it, and they've been ruling ever since. But take houses, for example. Uncomfortable things, ugly, inconvenient, dirty, everything wrong with them. But when men like Frank Lloyd Wright slip out from under the Martian's thumb long enough to suggest something better, look how the people react. They hate the thought. That's their Martians giving them orders. Look, Why should the Martians care what kind of houses we live in? Tell me that." Lyman frowned. "I don't like the note of skepticism I detect creeping into this conversation," he announced. "They care, all right. No doubt about it. They live in our houses. We don't build for our convenience. We build under order for the Martians the way they want it. They're very much concerned with everything we do, and the more senseless, the more concern. Take wars. Wars don't make sense from any human viewpoint. Nobody really wants wars, but we go right on having them. From the Martian viewpoint, they're useful. They give us a spurt in technology, and they reduce the excess population. And there are lots of other results, too. Colonization, for one thing. But mainly technology. In peacetime, if a guy invents jet propulsion, it's too expensive to develop commercially. In wartime, though, it's got to be developed. Then the Martians can use it whenever they want. They use us the way they'd use tools or limbs. And nobody ever really wins a war, except the Martians." The man in the brown suit chuckled. "That makes sense," he said. "It must be nice to be a Martian." "Why not? Up till now, no race ever successfully conquered and ruled another. The underdog could revolt or absorb. If you know you're being ruled, then the ruler's vulnerable. But if the world doesn't know, and it doesn't... Take radios," Lyman continued, going off at a tangent. "There's no earthly reason why a sane human should listen to a radio, but the Martians make us do it. They like it. Take bathtubs. Nobody contends bathtubs are comfortable, for us, but they're fine for Martians. All the impractical things we keep on using, even though we know they're impractical." "Typewriter ribbons," the brown man said, struck by the thought. "But not even a Martian could enjoy changing a typewriter ribbon." Lyman seemed to find that flippant. He said that he knew all about the Martians except for one thing, their psychology. "I don't know why they act as they do. It looks illogical sometimes, but I feel perfectly sure they've got sound motives for every move they make. Until I get that worked out, I'm pretty much at a standstill. Until I get evidence, proof, and help. I've got to stay undercover till then. And I've been doing that. I do what they tell me so they won't suspect, and I pretend to forget when they tell me to forget." "Then you've got nothing much to worry about." Lyman paid no attention. He was off again on a list of his grievances. "When I hear the water running in the tub and a Martian splashing around, I pretend I don't hear a thing. My bed's too short, and I tried last week to order a special length, but the Martian that sleeps there told me not to. He's a runt, like most of them. That is, I think they're runts. I have to deduce because you never see them undressed. But it goes on like that constantly. By the way, how's your Martian?" The man in the brown suit set down his glass rather suddenly. "My Martian?" "Now listen, I may be just a little bit drunk, but my logic remains unimpaired. I can still put two and two together. Either you know about the Martians or you don't. If you do, there's no point in giving me that my Martian routine. I know you have a Martian. Your Martian knows you have a Martian. My Martian knows. The point is, do you know? Think hard," Lyman urged solicitously. "No, I haven't got a Martian," the reporter said, taking a quick drink. The edge of the glass clicked against his teeth. "Nervous, I see," Lyman remarked. "Of course you have got a Martian. I suspect you know it." "What would I be doing with a Martian?" the brown man asked with dogged dogmatism. "What would you be doing without one? I imagine it's illegal. If they caught you running around without one, they'd probably put you in a pound or something until claimed." "Oh, you've got one all right. So have I. So has he, and he, and he, and the bartender." Lyman enumerated the other barflies with a wavering forefinger. "Of course they have," the brown man said. "But they'll all go back to Mars tomorrow, and then you can see a good doctor. You'd better have another drink." He was turning toward the bartender when Lyman, apparently by accident, leaned close to him and whispered urgently, "Don't look now." The brown man glanced at Lyman's white face reflected in the mirror before them. "It's all right," he said. "There aren't any Lyman gave him a fierce, quick kick under the edge of the bar. "Shut up! One just came in." And then he caught the brown man's gaze and with elaborate unconcern said, "So, naturally, there was nothing for me to do but climb out on the roof after it. Took me 10 minutes to get it down the ladder, and just as we reached the bottom it gave one bound, climbed up my face, sprang from the top of my head, and there it was again on the roof, screaming for me to get it down." "What?" the brown man demanded with pardonable curiosity. "My cat, of course. What did you think?" "No, never mind. Don't answer that." Lyman's face was turned to the brown man's, but from the corners of his eyes he was watching an invisible progress down the length of the bar toward a booth at the very back. "Now why did he come in?" he murmured. "I don't like this. Is he anyone you know?" "Is who? That Martian. Yours by any chance?" "No, I suppose not. Yours was probably the one who went out a while ago. I wonder if he went to make a report and sent this one in." "It's possible. It could be. You can talk now, but keep your voice low and stop squirming. Want him to notice we can see him?" "I can't see him. Don't drag me into this. You and your Martians can fight it out together. You're making me nervous. I've got to go anyway." But he didn't move to get off the stool. Across Lyman's shoulder he was stealing glances toward the back of the bar, and now and then he looked at Lyman's face. "Stop watching me," Lyman said. "Stop watching him. Anybody'd think you were a cat." "Why a cat? Why should anybody— Do I look like a cat?" "We were talking about cats, weren't we? Cats can see them quite clearly, even undressed, I believe. They don't like them." "Who doesn't like who?" "Whom?" "Neither likes the other. Cats can see Martians, shh, but they pretend not to, and that makes the Martians mad. I have a theory that cats ruled the world before Martians came. Never mind, forget about cats. This may be more serious than you think. I happen to know my Martian's taking tonight off, and I'm pretty sure that was your Martian who went out some time ago. And have you noticed that nobody else in here has his Martian with him? Do you suppose—" His voice sank. "Do you suppose they could be waiting for us outside?" "Oh, Lord," the brown man said. "In the alley with the cats, I suppose." "Why don't you stop this yammer about cats and be serious for a moment?" Lyman demanded, and then paused, paled, and reeled slightly on his stool. He hastily took a drink to cover his confusion. "What's the matter now?" the brown man asked. "Nothing." Gulp. "Nothing. It was just that he looked at me with, you know." "Let me get this straight. I take it the Martian is dressed like a human?" "Naturally." "But he's invisible to all eyes but yours." "Yes, he doesn't want to be visible just now. Besides," Lyman paused cunningly. He gave the brown man a furtive glance and then looked quickly down at his drink. "Besides, you know, I rather think you can see him. A little, anyway." The brown man was perfectly silent for about 30 seconds. He sat quite motionless, not even the ice in the drink he held clinking. One might have thought he did not even breathe. Certainly he did not blink. "What makes you think that?" he asked in a normal voice after the 30 seconds had run out. Did I say anything? I wasn't listening." Lyman put down his drink abruptly. "I think I'll go now." "No, you won't," the brown man said, closing his fingers around Lyman's wrist. "Not yet, you won't. Come back here. Sit down. Now, what was the idea? Where were you going?" Lyman nodded dumbly toward the back of the bar, indicating either a jukebox or a door marked men. "I don't feel so good. Maybe I've had too much to drink. I guess You're all right. I don't trust you back there with that invisible man of yours. You'll stay right here until he leaves." "He's going now," Lyman said brightly. His eyes moved with great briskness along the line of an invisible but rapid progress toward the front door. "See, he's gone. Now let me loose, will you?" The brown man glanced toward the back booth. "No," he said, "he isn't gone. Sit right where you are." It was Lyman's turn to remain quite still in a stricken sort of way for a perceptible while. The ice in his drink, however, clinked audibly. Presently he spoke. His voice was soft and rather soberer than before. "You're right. He's still there. You can see him, can't you?" The brown man said. "Has he got his back to us?" "You can see him, then? Better than I can, maybe. Maybe there are more of them here than I thought. They could be anywhere. They could be sitting beside you anywhere you go, and you wouldn't even guess until—" He shook his head a little. "They'd want to be sure," he said, mostly to himself. "They can give you orders and make you forget, but there must be limits to what they can force you to do. They can't make a man betray himself. They'd have to lead him on until they were sure." He lifted his drink and tipped it steeply above his face. The ice ran down the slope and bumped coldly against his lip, but he held it until the last of the pale, bubbling amber had drained into his mouth. He set the glass on the bar and faced the brown man. "Well?" he said. The brown man looked up and down the bar. "It's getting late," he said. "Not many people left. We'll wait." "Wait for what?" The brown man looked toward the back booth and looked away again quickly. "I have something to show you. I don't want anyone else to see." Lyman surveyed the narrow, smoky room. As he looked, the last customer beside themselves at the bar began groping in his pocket, tossed some change on the mahogany, and went out slowly. They sat in silence. The bartender eyed them with stolid disinterest. Presently, a couple in the front booth got up and departed, quarrelling in undertones. "Is there anyone left?" the brown man asked in a voice that did not carry down the bar to the man in the apron. "Only—" Lyman did not finish, but he nodded gently toward the back of the room. "He isn't looking. Let's get this over with. What do you want to show me?" The brown man took off his wristwatch and pried up the metal case. 2 small glossy photograph prints slid out. The brown man separated them with a finger. "I just want to make sure of something," he said. "First, why did you pick me out? Quite a while ago you said you'd been trailing me all day, making sure. I haven't forgotten that. And you knew I was a reporter. Suppose you tell me the truth now." Squirming on his stool, Lyman scowled. "It was the way you looked at things," he murmured. "On the subway this morning, I'd never seen you before in my life, but I kept noticing the way you looked at things. The wrong things, things that weren't there, the way a cat does. And then you'd always look away. I got the idea you could see the Martians too." "Go on," the brown man said quietly. "I followed you, all day. I kept hoping you'd turn out to be somebody I could talk to, because if I could know that I wasn't the only one who could see them, then I'd know there was still some hope left. It's been worse than solitary confinement. I've been able to see them for 3 years now. 3 years. And I've managed to keep my power a secret even from them. And somehow I've managed to keep from killing myself, too." 3 years, the brown man said. He shivered. "There was always a little hope. I knew nobody would believe, not without proof. And how can you get proof? It was only that I kept telling myself that maybe you could see them too, and if you could, maybe there were others. Lots of others, enough so we might get together and work out some way of proving to the world." The brown man's fingers were moving. In silence, he pushed a photograph across the mahogany. Lyman picked it up unsteadily. "Moonlight?" he asked after a moment. It was a landscape under a deep, dark sky with white clouds in it. Trees stood white and lacy against the darkness. The grass was white as if with moonlight and the shadows blurry. "No, not moonlight," the brown man said. "Infrared. I'm strictly an amateur, but lately I've been experimenting with infrared film, and I got some very odd results." Lyman stared at the film. "You see, I live near—" The brown man's finger tapped a certain quite common object that appeared in the photograph. "And something funny keeps showing up now and then against it, but only with infrared film. Now, I know chlorophyll reflects so much infrared light that grass and leaves photograph white. The sky comes out black like this. There are tricks to using this kind of film. Photograph a tree against a cloud and you can't tell them apart in the print. But you can photograph through a haze and pick out distant objects the ordinary film wouldn't catch. And sometimes, when you focus on something like this," he tapped the image of the very common object again, "you get a very odd image on the film. Like that. A man with 3 eyes." Lyman held the print up to the light. In silence, he took the other one from the bar and studied it. When he laid them down, he was smiling. "You know," Lyman said in a conversational whisper, "a professor of astrophysics at one of the more important universities had a very interesting little item in the Times the other day. Name of Spitzer, I think. He said that if there were life on Mars and if Martians had ever visited Earth, there'd be no way to prove it. Nobody would believe the few men who saw them. Not, he said, unless the Martians happened to be photographed." Lyman looked at the brown man thoughtfully. "Well," he said, "it's happened. You photographed them." The brown man nodded. He took up the prints and returned them to his watch case. "I thought so too, only until tonight I couldn't be sure. I'd never seen one fully as you have. It isn't so much a matter of what you call getting your brain scrambled with supersonics as it is of just knowing where to look. But I've been seeing part of them all my life, and so has everybody. It's that little suggestion of movement you never catch except just at the edge of your vision, just out of the corner of your eye. Something that's almost there, and when you look fully at it, there's nothing. These photographs showed me the way. It's not easy to learn, but it can be done. We're conditioned to look directly at a thing, the particular thing we want to see clearly, whatever it is. Perhaps the Martians gave us that conditioning. When we see a movement at the edge of our range of vision, it's almost irresistible not to look directly at it. So it vanishes." "Then they can be seen by anybody?" "I've learned a lot in a few days," the brown man said, "since I took those photographs. You have to train yourself. It's like seeing a trick picture, one that's really a composite after you study it. Camouflage. You just have to learn how, otherwise we can look at them all our lives and never see them." "The camera does, though." "Yes, the camera does. I've wondered why nobody ever caught them this way before. Once you see them on film, they're unmistakable, that third eye." "Infrared film's comparatively new, isn't it? And then I'll bet you have to catch them against that one particular background, or they won't show on the film. Like trees against clouds. It's tricky. You might have had just the right lighting that day and exactly the right focus, and the lens stopped down just right. A kind of minor miracle. It might never happen again exactly that way, but don't look now." They were silent. Furtively they watched the mirror. Their eyes slid along toward the open door of the tavern. And then there was a long, breathless silence. "He looked back at us," Lyman said very quietly. "He looked at us. That third eye." The brown man was motionless again. When he moved, it was to swallow the rest of his drink. "I don't think they're that suspicious yet," he said. "The trick will be to keep under cover until we can blow this thing wide open. There's got to be some way to do it, some way that will convince people." "There's proof. The photographs. A competent cameraman ought to be able to figure out just how you caught that Martian on film and duplicate the conditions. It's evidence." "Evidence can cut both ways," the brown man said. "What I'm hoping is that the Martians don't really like to kill unless they have to. I'm hoping they won't kill without proof. But—" he tapped his wristwatch. "There's two of us now, though," Lyman said. "We've got to stick together. Both of us have broken the big rule. Don't look now." The bartender was at the back, disconnecting the jukebox. The brown man said, "We'd better not be seen together unnecessarily. But if we both come to this bar tomorrow night at 9 for a drink, that wouldn't look suspicious, even to them." "Suppose—" Lyman hesitated. "May I have one of those photographs?" "Why?" "If one of us had an accident, the other one would still have the proof. Enough, maybe, to convince the right people." The brown man hesitated, nodded shortly, and opened his watch case again. He gave Lyman one of the pictures. "Hide it," he said. "It's evidence. I'll see you here tomorrow. Meanwhile, be careful. Remember to play safe." They shook hands firmly, facing each other in an endless second of final, decisive silence. Then the brown man turned abruptly and walked out of the bar. Lyman sat there. Between two wrinkles in his forehead, there was a stir and a flicker of lashes unfurling. The third eye opened slowly and looked after the brown man. If you're enjoying the stories, hit the like button to support the channel. Thanks. The Autumn After Next by Margaret St. Clair. Narrated by William Skye. Being a wizard missionary to the Friel needed more than magic. It called for a miracle. The spell the Friel were casting ought to have drawn the moon down from the heavens, made water run uphill, and inverted the order of the seasons. But since they had got Braw's blood instead of Newt's, were using Algernon instead of Vervet juice, and were 3 days later than the solstice anyhow, nothing happened. Nishan watched their antics with a bitter smile. He tried hard with them. The Friel were really a challenge to evangelical wizardry. They had some natural talent for magic, as was evinced by the frequent attempts they made to perform it, and they were interested in what he told them about its capacities. But they simply wouldn't take the trouble to do it right. How long had they been stamping around in their circle anyhow? Since early moonset, and it was now almost dawn. No doubt they would go on stamping all next day if not interrupted. It was time to call a halt. Nishan strode into the middle of the circle. Run, the village chief, looked up from his drumming. "Go away," he said. "You'll spoil the charm." "What charm? Can't you see by now, Rahun, that it isn't going to work?" "Of course it will. It just takes time." "Hell it will. Hell it does. Watch." Nishan pushed Rahun to one side and squatted down in the center of the circle. From the pockets of his black robe he produced stylus, dragon's blood, oil of anointing, and salt. He drew a design on the ground with the stylus, dropped dragon's blood at the corners of the parallelogram, and touched the inner cusps with the oil. Then, sighting carefully at the double red and white sun, which was just coming up, he touched the outer cusps with salt. An intense smoke sprang up. When the smoke died away, a small lizard-like creature was visible in the parallelogram. "Tell the demon what you want," Nishan ordered the Friel. The Friel hesitated. They had few wants, after all, which was one of the things that made teaching them magic difficult. "2 big dialer melons," one of the younger ones said at last. "A new undana necklace," said another. "A tutor like the one you have," said Rahun, who was ambitious. "Straw for a new roof on my hut," said one of the older females. "That's enough for now," Nishan interrupted. "The demon can't bring you a tutor, Rahun. You have to ask another sort of demon for that. The other things he can get. Samel, to work." The lizard in the parallelogram twitched its tail. It disappeared and returned almost immediately with melons, a handsome necklace, and an enormous heap of straw. "Can I go now?" it asked. "Yes." Nishan turned to the Friel who were sharing the dialer melons out around their circle. "You see, that's how it ought to be. You cast a spell, you're careful with it, and it works, right away." "When you do it, it works," Rn answered. "Magic works when anybody does it, but you have to do it right." Rahun raised his mud-plastered shoulders in a shrug. "It's such a lot of drees doing it that way. Magic ought to be fun." He walked away, munching on a slice of the melon the demon had brought. Nishan stared after him, his eyes hot. Drees was a Friel word that referred originally to the nasal drip that accompanied that race's virulent head colds. It had been extended to mean almost anything annoying. The Friel, who spent much of their time sitting in the rain, had a lot of colds in the head. Wasn't there anything to be done with these people? Even the simplest spell was too dreesish for them to bother with. He was getting a headache. He'd better perform a headache-removing spell. He retired to the hut the Friel had assigned to him. The spell worked, of course, but it left him feeling soggy and dispirited. He was still standing in the hut, wondering what he should do next, when his big black and gold tutor in the corner gave a faint woof. That meant headquarters wanted to communicate with him. Nishan carefully aligned the tutor, which is basically a sort of lens for focusing neural force, with the rising double suns. He moved his couch out into a parallel position and lay down on it. In a minute or two, he was deep in a cataleptic trance. The message from headquarters was long, circuitous, and couched in the elaborate, ego-caressing ceremonial of high magic, but its gist was clear enough. "Your report received," it boiled down to. "We are glad to hear that you are keeping on with the Friel. We do not expect you to succeed with them, none of the other magical missionaries we have sent out ever has. But if you should succeed, by any chance, you would get your senior warlock's rating immediately. It would be no exaggeration, in fact, to say that the highest office in the Brotherhood would be open to you." Nishan came out of his trance. His eyes were round with wonder and cupidity. His senior warlock's rating? Why, he wasn't due to get that for nearly 4 more 605-day years. And the highest office in the Brotherhood? That could mean anything. Anything. He hadn't realized the Brotherhood set such store on converting the Friel. Well, now, a reward like that was worth going to some trouble for. Nishan sat down on his couch, his elbows on his knees, his fists pressed against his forehead, and tried to think. The Friel liked magic, but they were lazy. Anything that involved accuracy impressed them as dreesish. And they didn't want anything. That was the biggest difficulty. Magic had nothing to offer them. He had never, Nishan thought, heard one of the Friel express a want. Wait, though, there was Rahun. He had shown a definite interest in Nishan's tutor. Something in its intricate, florid black and gold curves seemed to fascinate him. True, he hadn't been interested in it for its legitimate uses, which were to extend and develop a magician's spiritual power. He probably thought that having it would give him more prestige and influence among his people. But for one of the Friel to say, "I wish I had that about anything whatever," meant that he could be worked on. Could the tutor be used as a bribe? Nishan sighed heavily. Getting a tutor was painful and laborious. A tutor was carefully fitted to an individual magician's personality. In a sense, it was a part of his personality, and if Nishan let Rahun have his tutor, he would be letting him have a part of himself. But the stakes were enormous. Nishan got up from his couch. It had begun to rain, but he didn't want to spend time performing a rain-repelling spell. He wanted to find Rahun. Rahun was standing at the edge of the swamp, luxuriating in the downpour. The mud had washed from his shoulders, and he was already sniffling. Nishan came to the point directly. "I'll give you my tutor," he said, almost choking over the words, "if you'll do a spell, a simple spell, mind you, exactly right." Rahun hesitated. Nishan felt an impulse to kick him. Then he said, "Well..." Nishan began his instructions. It wouldn't do for him to help Rahun too directly, but he was willing to do everything reasonable. Rahun listened, scratching himself in the armpits and sneezing from time to time. After Nishan had been through the directions twice, Rahun stopped him. "No, don't bother telling me again, it's just more drees. Give me the materials and I'll show you. Don't forget you're giving me the tutor for this." He started off, Nishan after him, to the latter's hut. While Nishan looked on tensely, Rahun began going through the actions Nishan had told him. Halfway through the first decade, he forgot. He inverted the order of the hand passes, sprinkled salt on the wrong point, and mispronounced the names in the invocation. When he pulled his hands apart at the end, only a tiny yellow flame sprang up. Nishan cursed bitterly. Rahun, however, was delighted. "Look at that, will you?" he exclaimed, clapping his chapped, scabby little hands together. "It worked! I'll take the tutor home with me now." "The tutor? For that? You didn't do the spell right." Rohun stared at him indignantly. "You mean you're not going to give me the tutor after all the trouble I went to? I only did it as a favour, really. Nishan, I think it's very mean of you." "Try the spell again." "Oh, Dries, you're too impatient. You never give anything time to work." He got up and walked off. For the next few days, everybody in the village avoided Nishan. They all felt sorry for Rohun, who'd worked so hard, done everything he was told to, and been cheated out of his tutor by Nishan. In the end, the magician, cursing his own weakness, surrendered the tutor to Rohun. The accusatory atmosphere in the normally indifferent Friel was intolerable. But now what was he to do? He'd given up his tutor, he had to ask Rohun to lend it to him when he wanted to contact headquarters, and the senior rating was no nearer than before. His head ached constantly, and all the spells he performed to cure the pain left him feeling wretchedly tired out. Magic, however, is an art of many resources, not all of them savoury. Nishan, in his desperation, began to invoke demons more disreputable than those he would ordinarily have consulted. In effect, he turned for help to the magical underworld. His thuggish informants were none too consistent. One demon told him one thing, another something else. The consensus, though, was that while there was nothing the Friel actually wanted enough to go to any trouble for it, they didn't even want to get rid of their nasal drip, for example. In a perverse way, they were proud of it. There was one thing they disliked intensely: Nishan himself. The Friel thought, the demons reported, that he was inconsiderate, tactless, officious, and a crashing bore. They regarded him as the psychological equivalent of the worst case of Dries ever known, carried to the nth power. They wished he'd drop dead or hang himself. Nishan dismissed the last of the demons. His eyes had begun to shine. The Friel thought he was a nuisance, did they? They thought he was the most annoying thing they'd encountered in the course of their racial history? Good. Fine. Splendid. Then he'd really annoy them. He'd have to watch out for poison, of course, but in the end they'd turn to magic to get rid of him. They'd have to. And then he'd have them. They'd be caught. One act of communal magic that really worked, and they'd be sold on magic. He'd be sure of his senior rating. Nishan began his campaign immediately. Where the Friel were, there was he. He was always on hand with unwanted explanations, hypercritical objections, and maddening wouldn't-it-be-betters. Whereas earlier in his evangelical mission he had confined himself to pointing out how much easier magic would make life for the Friel, he now counselled and advised them on every phase of their daily routine, from mud-smearing to rain-sitting, and from the time they got up until they went to bed. He even pursued them with advice after they got into bed, and told them how to run their sex lives, advice which the Friel, who set quite as much store by their sex lives as anybody does, resented passionately. But most of all, he harped on their folly in putting up with nasal drip, and instructed them over and over again in the details of a charm, a quite simple charm, for getting rid of it. The charm would, he informed them, work equally well against anything, or person, that they found annoying. The food the Friel brought him began to have a highly peculiar taste. Nishan grinned and hung a theriacal charm, a first-class antidote to poison, around his neck. The Friel's distaste for him bothered him naturally, but he could stand it. When he had repeated the anti-annoyance charm to a group of Friel last night, he had noticed that Rohun was listening eagerly. It wouldn't be much longer now. On the morning of the day before the equinox, Nishan was awakened from sleep by an odd prickling sensation in his ears. It was a sensation he'd experienced only once before in his life, during his novitiate, and it took him a moment to identify it. Then he realized what it was. Somebody was casting a spell against him. At last! At last! It had worked! Nishan put on his robe and hurried to the door of the hut. The day seemed remarkably overcast, almost like night, but that was caused by the spell. This one happened to involve the optic nerves. He began to grope his way cautiously toward the village centre. He didn't want the Friel to see him and get suspicious, but he did want to have the pleasure of seeing them cast their first accurate spell. He was well protected against wind damage from it, of course. When he was almost at the centre, he took cover behind a hut. He peered out. They were doing it right. Oh, what a satisfaction! Nishan felt his chest expand with pride. And when the spell worked, when the big wind swooped down and blew him away, the Friel would certainly receive a second magical missionary more kindly. Nishan might even come back, well disguised, himself. The ritual went on. The dancers made 3 circles to the left, 3 circles to the right. Cross over and all sprinkle salt on the interstices of the star Rahun had traced on the ground with the point of a knife. Back to the circle. 1 to the left, 1 to right, while Rahun in the centre of the circle dusted over the salt with what? Hey! Nishan yelled in sudden alarm. Not brimstone! Watch out! You're not doing it right! His chest contracted suddenly, as if a large stony hand had seized his thorax above the waist. He couldn't breathe, he couldn't think, he couldn't even say ouch. It felt as if his chest, no, his whole body, was being compressed in on itself and turning into something as hard as stone. He tried to wave his tiny, heavy arms in a counter-charm. He couldn't even inhale. The last emotion he experienced was one of bitterness. He might have known the Friel couldn't get anything right. The Friel take a dim view of the small stone image that now stands in the centre of their village. It is much too heavy for them to move, and while it is not nearly so much of a nuisance as Nishan was when he was alive, it inconveniences them. They have to make a detour around it when they do their magic dances. They still hope, though, that the spells they are casting to get rid of him will work eventually. If he doesn't go away this autumn, he will the autumn after next. They have a good deal of faith in magic when you come right down to it, and patience is their long suit. Don't forget to hit the like button to help this video spread. Thanks. A Matter of Protocol by Jack Sharkey. Narrated by William Skye. First contact was always dangerous, but usually only to the man involved. From space, the planet Viridian resembled a great green moss-covered tennis ball. When the spaceship had arrowed even closer to the lush jungle that was the surface of the 7,000-mile sphere, there was still no visible break in the green cloak of the planet. Even when they dipped almost below their margin of safety, spaceships were poorly built for extended flight within the atmosphere, it took nearly a complete circuit of the planet before a triangle of emptiness was spotted. It was in the midst of the tangled canopy of treetops, themselves interwoven inextricably with coarse-leaved, ropey vines that sprawled and coiled about the upthrust branches like underfed anacondas. Into the centre of this triangle the ship was lowered on sputtering blue pillars of crackling energy to come to rest on the soft, loamy earth. A bare instant after set-down, crewmen exploded from the airlock and dashed into the jungle shadows with high-pressure tanks of gushing spume. Their job was to coat, cool, and throttle the hungry fires trickling in bright orange fingers through the heat-blackened grasses. Higher in the trees, a few vines smouldered fitfully where the fires had brushed them, then hissed into smoky wet ash as their own glutinous sap smothered the urgent embers. But the fire was going out. "Under control, sir," reported a returning crewman. Lieutenant Jerry Norcris emerged into the green gloaming that cloaked the base of the ship with a net of harlequin diamonds. Jerry nodded abstractedly as other crewmen laid a lightweight form-fitting couch alongside the tail fins near the airlock. On this couch Jerry reclined. Remaining crew members turned their firefighting gear over to companions and stood guard in a rough semicircle with loaded rifles, their backs to the figure on the couch, facing the jungle and whatever predatory dangers it might hold. Ensign Bob Ryder, the technician who had the much softer job of simply controlling and coordinating any information relayed by Jerry, leaned out through the open circle in the hull. "All set, sir," said the tech. Jerry nodded and settled a heavily wired helmet onto his head, while Bob made a hookup between the helmet and the power outlet that was concealed under a flap of metal on the tail fin. Helmet secured, Jerry lay back upon the couch and closed his eyes. "Anytime you're ready, Ensign." Bob hurried back inside, found the panel he sought among the jumble of high-powered machinery there, and placed a spool of microtape on a spindle inside it. He shut the panel and thumbed the button that started an impulse radiating from the tape into the jungle. The impulse had been detected and taped by a robo-rocket which had circled the planet for months before their arrival. It was one of the 2 Viridian species whose types were as yet uncatalogued by the Space Corps in its vast files of alien life. Jerry's job as a space zoologist was to complete those files, planet by planet, throughout the spreading wave of slowly colonized universe. Bob made sure the tape was functioning. Then he clicked the switch that would stimulate the contact center in Jerry's brain and release his mind into that of the taped alien for an immutable 40 minutes. Outside the ship, recumbent in the warm green-gold shadows, Jerry's consciousness was dwarfed for an instant by a white lightning flash of energy. And then his body went limp as his mind sprang with thought speed into contact. Jerry opened his eyes to a dizzying view of the dull brown jungle floor. He blinked a moment, then looked toward his feet. He saw 2 sets of thin, knobby V's extending forward and partly around the tiny limb he stood upon, their chitinous surface shiny with the wetness of the jungle air. Slowly working his jaws, he heard the extremely gentle click as they came together. The endoskeleton must exist all over his host's body. After making certain it would not disturb his balance on the limb, he attempted bringing whatever on the alien passed for hands before his face. Sometimes aliens had no hands, nor any comparable organisms. Then Jerry would have to soft-pedal the mental nagging of being amputated, an unavoidable carryover from his subconscious wrong feeling about armlessness. But this time the effort moved up multi-jointed limbs, spindly as a cat's whiskers, terminating in a perpetually coiling soft prehensile tip. He tried feeling along his torso to determine its size and shape, but the worm-like tips were tactilely insensitive. Hoping to deduce his shape from his shadow, he inched sideways along the limb on those inadequate-looking 2-pronged feet toward a blob of yellow sunlight nearer the trunk. The silhouette on the branch showed him a stubby, cigar-shaped torso. "I seem to be a semi-tentacled no-hop grasshopper," he mused to himself, vainly trying to turn his head on his neck. Head, thorax, and abdomen all one piece. He tried flexing what would be, in a man, the region of the shoulder blades. He was rewarded by the appearance of long, narrow wings, 2 sets of them like a dragonfly's, from beneath 2 flaps of chitin on his back. He tried an experimental flapping. The pair of wings, white and stiff like starched tissue paper, not veinous as in earth insects, dissolved in a buzzing blur of motion. The limb fell away from under his tiny V-shaped feet. And then he was up above the blinding green blanket of jungle treetops, his shadow pacing his forward movement along the close-packed quilt of wide leaves below. "I'd better be careful," thought Jerry. "There may be avian life here that considers my species the pièce de résistance of the pteroid set." Slowing his rapid wing beat, he let himself drop down toward the nearest mattress-sized leaf. He folded his out-thrust feet in mid-air and dropped the last few inches to a cushiony rest. A slight shimmer of dizziness gripped his mind. Perhaps the skull of this creature was ill-equipped to ward off the hot rays of the tropic sunlight. Lest his brain be fried in its own casing, Jerry scuttled along the velvet top of the leaf and ducked quickly beneath its nearest overlapping companion. The wave of vertigo passed quickly there in the deep shadow. Under the canopy of leaves, Jerry crawled back to a limb near the top of the tree. A few feet from where he stood, something moved. Jerry turned that way. Another creature of the same species was balancing lightly on a green limb of wire thickness, its gaze fixed steadily toward the jungle flooring, as Jerry's own had been on entering the alien body. Watching out for predators? Or for victims? He could, he knew, pull his consciousness back enough to let the creature's own consciousness carry it through its daily cycle of eating, avoiding destruction, and the manifold businesses of being an ambient creature. But he decided to keep control. It would be easier to figure out his host's ecological status in the planet's natural life balance by observing the other one for a while. Jerry always felt more comfortable when he was in full control. You never knew when an alien might stupidly stumble into a fatality that any intelligent mind could easily have avoided. Idly, as he watched his fellow creature down near the inner part of the branch, he wondered how much more time he would be in contact. Subjectively, he'd seemed to be hosted for about 10 minutes, but one of the drawbacks of contact was the subjugation of personal time sense to that of the host. Depending on the species he hosted, the 40-minute contact period could be an eternity or the blink of an eye. Nothing further seemed to be occurring. Jerry reluctantly withdrew some of his control from the insect mind to see what would happen. Immediately it inched forward until it was in the same position it had been in when Jerry made contact, V-shaped feet forward and slightly around the narrow branch, eyes fixed upon the brownish jungle floor, body motionless with folded wings. For a while, Jerry tried listening to its mind, but received no readable thoughts. Only a sense of imminence, of patience, of waiting. It didn't take long for Jerry to grow bored with this near-mindless outlook. He reassumed full control. Guiding the fragile feet carefully along the branch, he made his way to his fellow watcher and tried out the creature's communication system. His mind strove to activate something on the order of a larynx. The insect's nervous system received this impulse, changed in interspecies translation, as a broad request for getting a message to its fellow. Its body responded by lifting the multi-jointed arms forward. It clapped the hard inner surfaces of the wrists together so fast that they blurred into invisibility as the wings had done. A thin, ratchety sound came forth from that hard-shell contact. The other insect looked up in annoyance, then returned its gaze to the ground again. Oral conversation thus obviated, Jerry tried for physical attention-getting. He reached out a vermiform forelimb tip and tugged urgently at the other insect's nearest hind leg. An angry movement gave out the unmistakable pantomimic message, "For Pete's sake, get off my back! I'm busy!" The other insect spread its thin double wings and went buzzing off a few trees away, then settled on a limb there and took up its earthward vigil once more. "Well, they're not gregarious, that's for sure," said Jerry to himself. "I wish I knew what the hell we were waiting for." He decided he was sick of ground watching and turned his attention to his immediate vicinity. His gaze wandered along all the twists, juts, and thrusts of branch and vine beneath the sun-blocking leaves. And all at once he realized he was staring at another of his kind. So still had its dull green-brown body been that he'd taken it for a ripple of bark along a branch. Carefully, he looked further on. Beyond the small, still figure, he soon located another like it, and then another. Within a short space of time, he had found 3 dozen of the insects sitting silently around him in a spherical area barely 10 feet in diameter. Oddly disconcerted, he once more spread his stiff white wings and fluttered away through the treetops, careful to avoid coming out in direct sunlight this time. He flew until a resurgence of giddiness told him he was overstraining the creature's stamina. He dropped onto a limb and looked about once more. Within a very short time he had spotted dozens more of the grasshopper things. All were the same, sitting in camouflaged silence, steadily eyeing the ground. Damn, thought Jerry. They don't seem interested in eating, mating, or fighting. All they want to do is sit. Sit and wait. But what are they waiting for? There was, of course, the possibility that he'd caught them in an off period. If the species were nocturnal, then he wouldn't get any action from them till after sunset. That, he realized gloomily, meant a recontact later on. One way or another, he would have to determine the functions, capabilities, and menace, if any, of the species with regard to the influx of colonists who would come to Viridian only if his report pronounced it safe. Once again, he let the insect's mind take over. Again, that overpowering feeling of imminence. He was irritated. It couldn't just be looking forward to nightfall. There were too many things tied in with the imminence feeling, the necessity for quiet, for motionlessness, for careful watching. The more he thought on it, the more he had the distinct intuition that it would sit and stare at the soft mulch-covered jungle floor, be it bright daylight or blackest gloom, waiting and waiting and waiting. Then, suddenly, the slight feel of imminence became almost unbearable apprehension. The change in intensity was due to a soft, cautious shuffling sound from down in the green-gold twilight. Something was coming through the jungle. Something that moved on careful feet along the springy, moist brown surface below the trees. Far below, a shadow detached itself slowly from the deeper shadows of the trees, and a form began to emerge in the one filtered sunlight. An all-encompassing lance of silent white lightning. Contact was over. Jerry sat up on the couch, angry. He pulled the helmet off his head as Bob Ryder leaned out the airlock once more. "How'd it go, sir?" "Lousy. I'll have to re-establish. Didn't have time to learn it sufficiently." A slight expression of disappointment on the tech's face made him add, "Don't tell me you have the other tape in place already." "Sorry," Bob said. "You usually do a complete learning in one contact." "Oh." Jerry shrugged and reached for the helmet again. "Never mind, I'll take on the second alien long as it's already set up. I may just have hit the first one in an off period. The delay in recontact may be just what I need to catch it in action." Settling the helmet snugly on his head once more, he leaned back onto the couch and waited. He heard the tech's feet clanking along the metal plates inside the ship, then the soft clang of an opening door in the power room, and whiteness. Writhing electric whiteness and cold silence. And he was in contact. Darkness and musky warmth. Then a slot of light appeared, a thin fuzzy line of yellow striped with spiky green. Jerry had time, in the brief flicker, to observe thick bear-like forelimbs holding up a squarish trap-door fastened with cross twigs for support. Then the powerful forepaws let the door drop back into place, and it was dark again. He hadn't liked those forepaws. Though thick as and pawed like a bear's, they were devoid of hair. They had skin thin as a caterpillar's, a mottled pink with sick-looking areas of deathly white. Skin like that would be a pushover to actinic rays for any long exposure. Probably the thing lived underground here, almost permanently. His eyes had detected a rude assortment of thick wooden limbs curving in and out at regular intervals in the vertical wall of soil that was the end of this tunnel, just below the trap-door. Tree roots, but formed by some odd natural quirk into a utile ladder. But why had the thing peered out, then dropped the door to wait? Did every species on this planet hang around expectantly and nothing else? And what was the waiting for? Then he felt the urge within the creature, the urge to scurry up that ladder into the light. But there was, simultaneously, a counter-urge in the thing, telling it to please wait a little longer. Jerry recognized the urge by quick anthropomorphosis. It was the goofy urge, the crazy urge, like one gets on the brinks of awesome heights or on subway platforms as the train roars in. The impulsive urge to self-destruction, so swiftly frightening and so swiftly suppressed. Yet it had lifted and dropped that lid too briefly to have seen anything outside. Could it be listening for something? Carefully he relinquished his control of the beast, fraction by fraction, to see what it would do. It rose on tiptoe at once and again lifted that earthen door. It squinted at the profusion of green-yellow sunlight that stung its eyes. Then it rose on powerful hind limbs and clambered just high enough on that ladder to see over the grassy rim of the trapdoor hole. Jerry then heard the soft shuffling sound that had re-alerted it and saw the source. Out on the matted brown jungle flooring beneath the towering trees, another of the bear things was moving forward from an open turf door, emitting low, whimpering snorts as it inched along through the dappling yellow sunlight. Obviously it was following that manic destruction impulse that he just felt and managed to suppress. It must have been almost 100 degrees out there, and the damned thing was shivering. Here and there, Jerry noticed suddenly other half-open trapdoors were framing other bear things' heads. The air was taut with electric tension, the tension of a slow trigger squeeze that moves millimeter by millimeter toward the instant explosion. The soft shuffling sounds of the animal's movement jogged Jerry's memory then, and he knew it for the sound he had heard when enhosted in the grasshopper thing. Was a bear thing what they'd been waiting in the trees so silently for? And what would be the culmination of that vigil? Then the bear thing he was in contact with hitched itself up another root rung. Jerry saw the thing toward which the quaking creature was headed, in a hunched crawl, its whimpers more anguished by the moment. Pendant in the green gloaming, about 4 feet above the spongy brown jungle floor, hung a thick yellow-grey gourd at the tip of a long vine. Its sides glittered stickily with condensed moisture that mingled with the effluvium of the gourd itself. The odour was both noisome and compelling, powerful as a bushel of rotting roses. It sickened as it lured, teased the nostrils as it cloyed within the lungs. To this dangling obscenity the bear thing moved. Its eyes were no longer afraid, but glazed and dulled by the strength of that musky lure. Its movements were fluid and trance-like. It arose on sturdy hind limbs and struck at the gourd with a gentle paw, sending it jouncing to one side on its long green vine. As it bobbed back, the creature struck it off in the opposite direction with a sharper blow. Jerry watched in fascination. The gourd swung faster. The mottled, pink-white alien creature swayed and wove its forelimbs and thick body in a ritual dance matching the tempo of the arcing gourd. Then Jerry noted that the vine was unlike earth vines which parasitically employ treetops as their unwilling trellises. It is a limp extension of the tip of a tree branch itself. So were all the other vines in that green matting overhead. A ripping sound yanked his gaze back to the dazed creature and the gourd again. A ragged tear had riven the side of the gourd. Tiny coils of green were dribbling out in batches, like watch springs spilled from a paper bag. They struck with a bounce and wriggle on the resilient brown mulch. And then, as they straightened themselves, Jerry knew them for what they were, miniature versions of the grasshopper things, shaped precisely like the adult but only a third as large. The bear thing's movements had gone from graceful fluidity to frenzy now. A loud whistle of fright escaped it as the last of the twitching green things flopped from its vegetable cocoon, whirred white wings to dry them, and flew off. And the lumbering creature had reason for its fright. The instant the last coil of wiggly green life was a vanishing blur in the green shadows, a cloud of darker green descended upon the pink form of the beast from the trees. The grasshopper things were waiting no longer. Thousands swarmed on the writhing form until the bear thing was a lumpy green parody of itself. As quickly as the cloud had plunged and clustered, it fell away. The earth was teeming with the flip-flopping forms of dying insects, white wings going dark brown and curling like cellophane in open flame. The bear thing itself was no longer recognizable, its flesh a myriad egg-like white lumps. It swayed in agony for a moment, then toppled. Instantly the other creatures, his host with them, were racing forward to the site of the encounter. Jerry felt his host's long, gummy tongue flick out and snare one, just one, of the dead adult insects. It was ingested whole by a deft backflip of tongue to gullet. As his host turned tail and scurried for the tunnel once more, Jerry swiftly took control again and halted it to observe any further developments. Each of the other things, after a one-insect gulp, was just vanishing back underground. The turf tops were dropping neatly into almost undetectable place, hiding the tunnels. The sunlight nipped at his pale flesh, but Jerry held off from a return to the underground sanctuary, still watching that lump-covered corpse on the earth. Then, the vine, its burden gone, began to drip a thick ichor from its ragged end upon the dead animal beneath it. And as the ichor touched upon a white lump, the lump would swell, wriggle, and change colour. Jerry watched with awe as the colour became a mottled pink, and the surface of the lumps cracked and shriveled away, and tiny forms plopped out onto the ground, miniature bear things, tiny throats emitting eager mouse squeaks of hunger. They rushed upon the body in which they'd been so violently incubated, and swiftly, systematically devoured it, blood, bone, and sinew. And when not even a memory of the dead beast was left upon the soil, the tiny pink-white things began to burrow downward into the ground. Soon there was nothing left in the area but a dried fragment of vine, a few loose mounds of soil, and a vast silence. "I'll be a monkey's uncle," said Jerry, forgetting in his excitement that this phrase was nearly a concise parody of the space zoologist's final oath of duty, and kiddingly used as such by the older members of the group. The whole damned planet was symbiotic. After witnessing those alien life-death rites, it didn't take him long to figure out the screwball connections between the species. Insects, once born of vine gourds and fully grown, then propagated their species by a strange means, laying bear eggs in a bear thing and dying. And dying, eaten by the surviving bears, they turned to seeds which, left in the tunnels by the bear things as droppings, in turn took root and became trees. And the trees, under the onslaught of another bear thing on a dangling pod, would produce new insects, then drip its ichor to fertilize the eggs in the newly dead bear thing. Jerry found his mind tangling as he attempted a better pinpointing of the plant-animal-insect relationship. A dead adult insect, plus a trip through a bear thing's alimentary canal, produced a tree. A tree pod, with the swatting stimulus of a bear thing's paws, gave birth to new insects. And insect eggs in animal flesh, stimulated by the tree ichor, gestated swiftly into young animals. That meant simply that insect plus bear equals tree, tree plus bear equals insect, and insect plus tree equals bear. With 3 systems, each relied on the non-inclusive member for the breeding ground. Insect plus ichor produced small animals in the animal flesh. Dead insect plus bear produced tree in the tree flesh, if one considered dead tree leaves and bark and such as the makeup of the soil. Bear swats plus tree produced insects. Damn, said Jerry to himself, but not in the insect flesh. The thing won't round off. He tried again, thinking hard. In effect, the trees were parents to the insects, insects parents to the bears, and bears parents to the trees. Though in another sense, bear flesh gave birth to new bears, digested insects gave birth through the tree medium to new insects, and trees through the insect medium gave birth to new trees. Jerry's head spun pleasantly as he tried vainly to solve the confusion. Men of science, he realized, would spend decades trying to figure out which species were responsible for which. It made the ancient chicken or egg question beneath consideration. And a lot of die-hard evolutionists were going to be bedded down with severe migraines when his report went into circulation. A dazzle of silent lightning, and contact was over. "Ready with that first tape again," Bob Ryder said as Jerry removed the contact helmet and brushed his snow-white hair back from his tanned, youthful face. "Or do you want a breather first?" Jerry shook his head. I won't need to recontact that other species, Ensign. I got its life relationships from the second contact. Really, sir? Said Bob. That's pretty unusual, isn't it? The whole damned planet's unusual, said Jerry, rising from his supine position and stretching luxuriously in the warm jungle air. You'll see what I mean when you process the second tape. Bob decided that Jerry, running pretty true to form for a space zoologist, wasn't in a particularly talkative mood, so he had to satisfy himself with waiting for the transcription of the contact to get the details. Later that day, an hour after takeoff, with Viridian already vanished behind them as the great ship ploughed through hyperspace toward Earth and home, Bob finished reading the report. Then he went down the passageway to the wardroom for coffee. Jerry was seated there already. Bob, quickly filling a mug from the polished percolator, slid into a seat across the table from his superior and asked the question that had been bugging him since seeing the report. Sir, on that second contact, has it occurred to you that you'd relinquish control to the host before you saw that other creature move out and start swatting the gourd thing? You mean, was I taking a chance on being destroyed in the host if the creature I was contacting gave in to the urge to do the swatting? Yes, sir, said Bob. I mean, I know you can take control any time if things get dangerous, but wasn't that cutting it kind of thin? Jerry shook his head and sipped his coffee. Wrong urge, Ensign. You'll note I recognized it as the goofy urge, the impulse to die followed instantly by a violent surge of self-preservation. It wasn't the death wish at all. Myself and the creatures who remained safely at the tunnel mouths had a milder form of what was affecting the creature that did start swatting the gourd. Then what was the difference, sir? Why did that one particular creature get the full self-destruction urge and no other? Jerry wrinkled his face in thought. I wish I didn't suspect the answer to that, Ensign. The only thing I hope it isn't is the thing I have the strongest inkling it is. Rotation. Something in their biology has set them up in a certain order for destruction. And that rite I saw performed was so unanimal, so formalized. Bob's eyes widened as he caught the inference. You think they have an inbuilt protocol? That if one particular creature missed its cue somehow, the designated subsequent creature would simply wait forever, never jumping its turn? That's what I mean, nodded Jerry. I hope I'm wrong. But the right creature made it, said Bob, blinking. We can't have upset the ecology, can we? Things develop fast on Viridian, mused Jerry. If I figure the time relationship between their egg hatching rate and growth rate, those trees must mature in growth in about a month. And we managed to shrivel a half-dozen vines with our rocket fires when we landed, and probably that many again when we blasted off. We dropped CO2 bombs after we cleared the trees, offered the tech uneasily. The fire was out in seconds. That wouldn't help an already shriveled vine, though, now would it? Sighed Jerry. And if my hunch about protocol is correct... The life cycle would interrupt? Gasped the tech. We'll see, said Jerry. It'll take us a month to get back, and there'll be another 6 months before the first wave of engineers is sent to begin the homesteads and industry sites. We'll see, Ensign. It took 2 months for the engineers to go out and return. They hadn't landed. A few orbits about the planet had shown them nothing but a vast dead ball of dust and rotted vegetation, totally unfit for human habitation. They brought back photographs taken of the dead planet that no longer deserved the name it had rated in life. But Jerry Norcris, space zoologist, made it a special point to avoid looking at any of them. Thanks for listening. Remember, you can get many more of my narrations outside of YouTube over on Substack with 3 free ones a week, and by checking out the modern indie sci-fi novels I've narrated, like Lords of Conquest Iron Raven and Control Spark. Links for all that are down in the description. See you in the next one.